From broken to unstoppable, the story no one believed in. He was standing in line at a grocery store, trying to buy a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter with a debit card he knew would decline. Behind him, a woman with 2 small children waited impatiently. The cashier swiped the card once. Declined. She swiped it again. Declined. "Do you have another form of payment?" the cashier asked, her voice neutral but her eyes already dismissive. Xavier Thompson felt his face burn with shame as he dug through his pockets, counting out crumpled dollar bills and loose change. $3.47. Not even enough for both items. He pushed the peanut butter aside, keeping only the bread. The woman behind him sighed loudly. "Some people really need to get their life together," she muttered to her children, not even bothering to lower her voice. That moment, standing in a grocery store at 28 years old, unable to afford basic food, being judged by a stranger, became the turning point that would transform Xavier Thompson from a broken man sleeping in his car into the CEO of a multimillion-dollar tech company. But nobody believed it was possible. Not his family. Not his friends. Not even Xavier himself at first. This is the story of how rock bottom became the foundation for everything. 6 months before that grocery store humiliation, Xavier Thompson's life looked completely different. He had a decent job as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized advertising firm in Atlanta, making $52,000 a year. He had a 1-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood, a girlfriend named Tasha who he'd been dating for 3 years, and a social life that included weekend brunches, happy hours, and the occasional vacation. It wasn't extraordinary, but it was stable. Comfortable. The kind of life that looked successful from the outside. But underneath that surface stability, cracks were already forming. Xavier had graduated from Georgia State University 4 years earlier with a degree in business administration and $80,000 in student loans. Between his loan payments, rent, car payment, and credit card debt from trying to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford, he was living paycheck to paycheck with zero savings. His job was soul-crushing. Every day he created marketing campaigns for products he didn't care about, working for clients who treated him like he was invisible, taking orders from a boss who seemed to delight in pointing out his mistakes in front of the entire team. But he told himself it was fine. This was what responsible adults did. You got a degree, you got a job, you paid your bills, and eventually things would get better. Except they didn't get better. They got worse. The first domino fell on a Tuesday in March when Xavier's boss, a middle-aged man named Gregory who wore expensive suits and drove a Tesla, called him into his office. "Xavier, I'm going to be straight with you," Gregory said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Your performance has been subpar for months. You lack initiative, your creative ideas are mediocre at best, and frankly, we need someone in this position who actually wants to be here." The words hit Xavier like physical blows. "I do want to be here. I've been working. We're letting you go. Effective immediately. HR will handle your exit paperwork." Just like that, Xavier's stable life began to crumble. He told himself it would be fine. He'd find another job quickly. He had experience, a degree, references. But week after week, the rejection emails piled up. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Your qualifications don't quite match what we're looking for. We'll keep your resume on file." Without income, the bills became impossible. First, he maxed out his credit cards trying to keep up with rent and loan payments. Then the credit card started declining. Then the eviction notice appeared on his door. Tasha, who had been supportive at first, grew increasingly distant as Xavier's situation deteriorated. "I can't do this anymore," she told him one evening, her voice tired rather than angry. "I can't watch you give up on yourself. I can't be with someone who won't fight for a better life." "I am fighting," Xavier protested. "I'm applying to jobs every day." "No, you're going through the motions. You're not actually trying to change anything. You're just waiting for someone to rescue you." She left that night, taking with her not just her belongings but Xavier's last shred of belief that things might turn around. The eviction came next. Xavier packed everything he owned into trash bags and loaded them into his 1998 Honda Civic. He told himself it was temporary. He'd crash with friends until he got back on his feet. But his friends had their own lives, their own problems, their own reluctance to harbor someone who seemed to be in a permanent downward spiral. After a week on one friend's couch and 3 days on another's floor, Xavier found himself with nowhere to go. That's how he ended up sleeping in his car in a Walmart parking lot, washing up in gas station bathrooms, and trying to buy bread with pocket change while strangers judged him for not having his life together. At 28 years old, Xavier Thompson had lost everything. his job, his home, his relationship, his dignity, and most devastatingly, his belief that he was capable of anything better. He was broke. He was broken. And nobody, literally nobody, believed he would ever amount to anything, including himself. The night after the grocery store incident, Xavier sat in his car staring at his phone. He had been scrolling through social media for hours, looking at posts from people he went to college with. They were getting promotions, buying houses, getting married, taking vacations, celebrating achievements. Meanwhile, Xavier was living in his car, unable to afford food, too ashamed to contact his mother because he couldn't bear to tell her that her sacrifices, all those double shifts she worked to help him through college, had resulted in this. He opened his notes app and started typing, not because he had a plan but because he needed to get the thoughts out of his head before they consumed him entirely. Why am I here? What decisions led to this moment? He started listing them. Took a job I hated because it was safe. Stayed in that job instead of pursuing something I actually cared about. Spent money trying to look successful instead of actually building security. Waited for someone else to change my circumstances instead of changing them myself. Let rejection define me instead of motivate me. Believed that my degree and my resume were enough, without building actual valuable skills. As he wrote, something shifted. The shame and despair that had been crushing him for months began to transform into something else. Anger. But not the destructive kind, the clarifying kind. The kind that burns away excuses and reveals hard truths. That realization changed how Xavier approached his business. Instead of trying to do the next morning, Xavier drove his car to the Atlanta Public Library when it opened at 9 a.m. He walked inside with a notebook and a pen, found a quiet corner, and asked himself a question that most people never seriously consider. What could I create that would solve a real problem for real people and generate actual income? He spent 12 hours in that library researching, thinking, and planning. He studied successful entrepreneurs, not the Silicon Valley billionaires with trust funds and venture capital, but the people who had started from nothing. The immigrants who built businesses with borrowed money. The single parents who turned side hustles into full-time companies. The formerly incarcerated people who created second chances for themselves. He discovered that almost every successful business started the same way. Someone identified a problem that people would pay to solve, then figured out how to solve it better, faster, or cheaper than anyone else. Xavier had a business degree but zero practical experience actually building a business. He had no capital, no product, no customers. But he had something that many aspiring entrepreneurs lack. Absolute desperation combined with complete freedom. When you're sleeping in your car, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Risk becomes irrelevant because you're already at the bottom. By the end of that first day in the library, Xavier had identified his opportunity. Small businesses needed affordable, effective digital marketing, but most couldn't afford the expensive agencies that charged thousands of dollars per month. He didn't have experience running a marketing agency, but he had 4 years of experience in marketing. He knew how to create campaigns, analyze data, and generate results. He just needed to prove it. Xavier spent the next week living in the library. He taught himself advanced digital marketing techniques through free online courses. He created a professional-looking website using free tools. He studied successful case studies and practiced creating marketing strategies. And then he did something audacious. He reached out to 20 small business owners in Atlanta and offered to handle their digital marketing completely free for 1 month. All he asked in return was permission to use their results as case studies and testimonials if his campaign succeeded. 17 of them ignored his email. 2 said no. But one, a woman named Nia who owned a struggling bakery in West End, said yes. I can't afford to pay you anyway, Nia told Xavier when they met at her bakery. So sure, do whatever you want. I've got nothing to lose. Xavier threw everything he had into that bakery's marketing campaign. He optimized their social media presence, created targeted advertising campaigns with a tiny budget, developed email marketing sequences, and analyzed data to figure out exactly what was working and what wasn't. He worked 18 hours a day, fueled by gas station coffee and cheap protein bars, using the library's computers during the day and his phone at night when the library closed. Within 2 weeks, Nia's bakery saw a 340% increase in website traffic. Within 3 weeks, her online orders had tripled. By the end of the month, she had hired 2 additional employees to keep up with demand. Xavier, Nia said, staring at the numbers he showed her, how did you do this? I just paid attention to what your customers actually wanted and made it easy for them to find you, Xavier replied. I can do the same thing for other businesses. Can I hire you? Like actually pay you to keep doing this? That was the moment Xavier Thompson's new life began. Not with a huge break or a lucky opportunity, but with one small business owner who was willing to give him a chance. Nia paid him $500 for the next month of services. It wasn't much, but it was something. And more importantly, it was proof of concept. Xavier used that success story to approach other small businesses. He showed them concrete results, not empty promises. He offered affordable rates that small businesses could actually pay, not the inflated prices that big agencies charged. Within 2 months, he had 5 clients. Within 4 months, he had 12. Within 6 months, he was making enough money to move out of his car and into a small studio apartment. But the real transformation wasn't in his bank account, it was in his mindset. Xavier had discovered something that most people never learn. Your circumstances don't define your possibilities. Your decisions do. Getting those first clients was just the beginning. The real challenge was scaling his one-person operation into an actual business while fighting against constant setbacks, self-doubt, and a world that seemed determined to remind him that he was supposed to have failed. Xavier's typical day during those first 18 months looked nothing like the success stories people post on social media. He would wake up at 5 a.m. in his tiny studio apartment, spend 2 hours learning new marketing techniques before his clients' work began, then work on campaigns and analytics until midnight. He had no team, no fancy office, no expensive software subscriptions. Everything was done manually, on free or cheap tools, through sheer force of effort and attention to detail. The first major obstacle came when one of his earliest clients, a restaurant owner named Troy, posted a review calling Xavier a scam artist after his marketing campaign didn't produce immediate results. "I paid this guy $600 for 3 months of marketing and my restaurant is still struggling," Troy wrote on several business forums. "Save your money. These young guys talk a big game but they don't know what they're doing." The review devastated Xavier. Not just because it was unfair. He had tripled Troy's online engagement and brought in dozens of new customers, but Troy's restaurant had deeper problems that no marketing could fix, but because it threatened the reputation he was desperately trying to build. His first instinct was to defend himself publicly, to point out Troy's unrealistic expectations and poor management. But instead, Xavier did something that demonstrated the maturity he was developing through his struggle. Independence taken to an extreme becomes isolation. That realization changed how Xavier approached his business. Instead of trying to do, he called Troy directly. "I saw your review," Xavier said, "and I understand your frustration. Marketing can bring customers to your door, but I can't control the experience they have once they're inside. That's on you. But I also should have been clearer about what I could and couldn't do for your business. I'm sorry I didn't manage your expectations better." The honesty disarmed Troy. They spent an hour on the phone discussing the restaurant's real problems: inconsistent food quality, poor customer service, pricing issues, and Xavier offered suggestions that had nothing to do with marketing. Troy didn't change his review, but he stopped actively bad-mouthing Xavier. And Xavier learned a crucial lesson. Sometimes you win by being honest about limitations, not by overselling what you can deliver. The second major obstacle was more personal. 7 months into building his business, Xavier's mother finally learned that he had been homeless. Rosalind Thompson showed up at his studio apartment unannounced, having heard through a mutual connection that Xavier had been sleeping in his car earlier that year. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you come home? Why did you let yourself suffer like that?" Xavier tried to explain that he had been too ashamed, too afraid of disappointing her after everything she had sacrificed for his education. But his mother wasn't having it. "I worked 2 jobs so you could have opportunities," she said, her voice breaking. "And when you needed help, you chose pride over family. That's not strength, Xavier. That's foolishness." The conversation left Xavier shaken. 4 months, he had been telling himself a story about being self-reliant, about proving he could make it on his own. But his mother's words, "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that being fired from my revealed a truth he hadn't wanted to face. Asking for help isn't weakness," and everything himself, he started building relationships with other entrepreneurs, joining communities, seeking mentorship, and learning from people who had already walked the path he was trying to navigate. By month 9, Xavier had 16 clients and was bringing in about $8,000 per month in revenue. It was enough to live on, but he was working 80-hour weeks and burning out fast. He knew he needed to scale, but he had no capital to hire employees and no idea how to manage people even if he could afford them. That's when he met Elijah, a 22-year-old college dropout who was doing freelance graphic design while living with his parents and looking for something bigger to be part of. "I don't have money to pay you what you're worth," Xavier told Elijah honestly. "But I can offer you 15% equity in the business and the opportunity to build something real. If this company grows, you grow with it." Elijah took the deal, becoming Xavier's first employee. Within 2 months, they had 25 clients. Within 6 months, they had 40. But success brought new problems. Bigger clients meant bigger expectations. Bigger operations meant more complex logistics. And rapid growth meant mistakes were inevitable. The near catastrophe came in month 14 when a technical error caused 3 clients' advertising campaigns to spend their entire monthly budgets in a single day, generating 0 returns. Xavier was liable for the wasted money, about $4,500 total, which represented most of his savings. He could have made excuses, blamed the advertising platform, or fought the charges. Instead, he called each client personally, explained what happened, took full responsibility, and refunded their money from his own pocket. "You didn't have to do that," one client said. "These things happen in digital marketing." "I know," Xavier replied. "But I'm not building a business that makes excuses when things go wrong. I'm building one that takes responsibility and makes things right." That decision, choosing integrity over profit when it hurt, created loyalty that money couldn't buy. All 3 clients stayed with his agency, told others about his character, and became his most enthusiastic referrals. By month 18, Xavier Thompson Marketing had 60 clients, 4 employees, and was generating $35,000 per month in revenue. Xavier had moved into a real apartment, had money in savings for the first time in years, and was finally beginning to believe that he might actually make it. But the real test was still ahead. The breakthrough didn't come as a single dramatic moment. It came as a series of compounding wins that transformed Xavier's struggling agency into something extraordinary. It started when one of his clients, a boutique fitness studio owner named Keisha, asked if Xavier could speak at a local business networking event about digital marketing strategies for small businesses. Xavier had never done public speaking beyond college presentations, and the idea terrified him. But he remembered something Elijah had told him months earlier: "The skills that got you here won't be the skills that get you to the next level. You have to keep evolving." So Xavier said yes to the speaking opportunity. He spent 2 weeks preparing a presentation that wasn't about selling his services but about genuinely helping business owners understand how to market themselves effectively, even if they couldn't afford to hire someone like him. The night of the event, 67 small business owners showed up. Xavier stood in front of them, more nervous than he'd been since the day he was fired from his corporate job, and delivered a presentation that was honest, practical, and genuinely useful. He talked about his own failure, about sleeping in his car, about rebuilding from nothing. He didn't present himself as some guru who had figured everything out. He presented himself as someone who had learned through painful trial and error and was willing to share those lessons. The response was overwhelming. 12 business owners approached him after the event wanting to hire his agency. But more importantly, 3 other business events invited him to speak at their gatherings. Within 3 months, "I don't know what to say," Xavier admitted. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that being fired from my..." Xavier had become a known voice in Atlanta's small business community. Not because he had the biggest agency or the most impressive credentials, but because he was authentic, helpful, and actually delivered results. The real breakthrough came when the owner of a rapidly growing tech startup approached Xavier with an unusual proposition. "I've been watching your agency," the founder, a man named Terrence, told Xavier over coffee. "You're doing something different. Most marketing agencies focus on corporate clients with big budgets. You've built your entire business around making marketing accessible to small businesses that actually need it but can't afford traditional agencies." "That's the whole point," Xavier said. "I know what it's like to be overlooked because you don't have the resources that bigger companies have. What if you could scale that approach?" Terrence asked. "What if instead of serving clients one at a time, you created a software platform that helps small businesses do their own marketing with tools, templates, and guidance? You'd be solving the same problem for thousands of businesses instead of dozens." The idea hit Xavier like lightning. He had been thinking small: more clients, more employees, more revenue. But Terrence was suggesting something completely different. Create a product that could serve infinite customers without requiring infinite time. Over the next 6 months, Xavier and his team built GrowthKit, a software platform designed specifically for small business owners who needed professional marketing tools but couldn't afford expensive agencies or complicated enterprise software. They poured everything into the development. Xavier used every dollar of profit to fund the project. Elijah learned to code so he could help build it. They worked nights and weekends, testing and refining, making sure the platform actually solved real problems. When they launched GrowthKit, they had no marketing budget, no venture capital, no fancy launch event. They simply reached out to their existing network of small business owners and offered the platform at a deeply discounted founding member rate. Within the first month, 247 businesses signed up. Within 3 months, 1,100. Within 6 months, 5,600. The monthly subscription revenue from GrowthKit exceeded what Xavier had made in his entire first year of agency work. But more than the money, the platform represented something profound. Xavier had gone from being unemployable to creating employment. From being broke to creating income opportunities. From being counted out to becoming impossible to ignore. 2 years after sleeping in his car, Xavier Thompson was featured in Forbes as an entrepreneur disrupting the digital marketing industry by making professional-grade tools accessible to underserved small businesses. The article opened with a line that made Xavier cry when he first read it. Xavier Thompson built his multimillion-dollar company the same way he rebuilt his life, by refusing to let circumstances define possibilities. But the moment that meant more than any article or revenue milestone came on a random Thursday afternoon when Xavier received an unexpected phone call. "Is this Xavier Thompson?" a familiar voice asked. "Yes, this is Xavier. This is Gregory Miller. I was your boss at the agency where you worked several years ago. I'm calling because I saw your story in Forbes and I wanted to apologize." Xavier's heart started pounding. Gregory, the man who had fired him, who had called his work mediocre, who had crushed his confidence, was apologizing? "I was wrong about you," Gregory continued. "I told you that you lacked initiative and that your ideas were mediocre. But the truth is I was threatened by you. You had passion and vision that I had lost years ago, and instead of encouraging it, I tried to make you fit into a box that was killing your potential. Agency was the best thing that could have happened to you. Not because I did you a favor, but because you proved that the corporate path isn't the only path to success. You built something real, something meaningful. And I'm sorry I couldn't see your potential when you were working for me." After they hung up, Xavier sat in his office, a real office now with a team of 15 people, and reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 3 years ago he had been broken, sleeping in his car and convinced he was a failure. Now he was running a company that served thousands of small businesses, employed a growing team and generated millions in annual revenue. But the money and the recognition weren't what made him feel successful. What made him feel successful was knowing that he had refused to let the worst moment of his life become his defining moment. The real transformation in Xavier Thompson's story wasn't about going from broke to wealthy. It was about going from broken to unbreakable. 3 years after hitting rock bottom, Xavier stood in front of an audience of 300 entrepreneurs at a business conference, sharing the lessons that had transformed his life. But he didn't talk about business strategies or marketing tactics. He talked about the internal shifts that made everything else possible. "The moment that changed everything," Xavier told the audience, "wasn't when I got my first client or made my first dollar. It was when I stopped waiting for permission to be successful." He explained that most people live their entire lives waiting for someone to validate them, to choose them, to give them the opportunity they think they need. They wait for the perfect job, the right investor, the ideal circumstances, the lucky break. But here's what I learned sleeping in my car. Nobody is coming to save you. Nobody is going to hand you the life you want. You have to decide you're worth fighting for, and then you have to fight. Xavier shared the 5 fundamental mindset shifts that took him from victim to victor. First, your circumstances are temporary, but your decisions are directional. "When you're broken, it feels permanent," Xavier said. "It feels like this is who you are now, this is your identity. But being broke is a temporary financial situation. Being broken is a temporary emotional state. Neither one defines your future unless you let it." Second, failure is information, not identity. I used to think that getting fired meant I was a failure. But getting fired just meant that particular job wasn't the right fit. Every rejection, every setback, every mistake is just information about what doesn't work. It only becomes your identity if you stop trying. Third, you don't need permission to create value. I spent months applying for jobs, waiting for someone to hire me, waiting for permission to be valuable. But value doesn't require permission. If you can solve a problem for someone, you're valuable. Period. You don't need a degree or a title or someone's approval to create something useful. Fourth, your past doesn't determine your potential. I had failed at corporate life. I had been homeless. I had been told I wasn't good enough. But all of that was information about my past, not a prediction about my future. The only thing that determines your potential is what you're willing to learn and how hard you're willing to work. Fifth, Success is built in private before it's celebrated in public. Everyone sees the Forbes article and the successful company. Nobody sees the 18 months of working 18-hour days, sleeping in cars, eating ramen, crying in library bathrooms, and questioning whether you're crazy for even trying. The private struggle is where success is actually built. The public recognition is just the receipt. Xavier's voice became emotional as he reached the end of his presentation. 3 years ago, I was the person everyone had given up on, including myself. I had every reason to quit, every excuse to stay stuck, every justification for why success wasn't meant for people like me. But somewhere between sleeping in a Walmart parking lot and building a multimillion-dollar company, I learned the most important lesson of my life. You are not your circumstances. You are your decisions. And every single day, you get to decide who you're becoming. The audience stood and applauded, but Xavier held up his hand. I don't want your applause for my success, he said. I want you to believe in your own. Because if I can go from broken to unstoppable, so can you. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. Maybe right now you're in your car, your small apartment, your parents' basement, wondering if you'll ever make it. Maybe you've been fired, rejected, dismissed, told you're not good enough, not smart enough, not ready. Maybe you're looking at your bank account and your dreams and wondering how you're supposed to get from here to there. Here's what I need you to understand. Xavier Thompson didn't become unstoppable because he got lucky. He became unstoppable because he made a decision that rock bottom was a foundation, not a final destination. He became unstoppable because he stopped waiting for circumstances to change and started making decisions that would change his circumstances. He became unstoppable because he refused to let the worst chapter of his life become the only chapter of his life. And you can too. Your breakthrough isn't waiting for perfect circumstances. It's waiting for a decision. The decision that you're done accepting less than you're capable of. The decision that you're going to fight for your future even when nobody believes in it. The decision that being broken is temporary, but giving up is permanent. 3 years from now, you could still be in the same place, telling yourself the same stories about why success is for other people. Or 3 years from now, you could be telling a story about how you rebuilt your life from nothing, how you refused to quit when quitting was the easier option, how you became the person nobody believed in until you made it impossible to ignore. The choice is yours. But I'll tell you this, if Xavier Thompson could go from sleeping in his car to building a multimillion-dollar company, if he could go from being fired and forgotten to being featured and celebrated, if he could go from broken to unstoppable, then so can you. Your story isn't over. This is just the part where you decide to rise. Don't stop now. Your chapter isn't over. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button, subscribe to Toshibest TV, and share this message with someone who needs a reminder that their story isn't over. Together we rise.